Weekly market recap, world news, the Nasdaq and the Dow Jones. For the week of June 29 through July 9, 2026. The Dow just smashed through 53,000 for the first time ever, and 48 hours later, it had its worst day of the year. That's the kind of week it's been. Welcome back. Today we're breaking down exactly what happened in the markets and in the world over the past week. And it comes down to three big storylines. First, the record-breaking rally that pushed the Dow to all-time highs, and the rougher, choppier ride the Nasdaq took to get there because of one very hot sector, semiconductors. Second, the geopolitical shock that stopped the rally in its tracks, renewed conflict between the US and Iran, and a single comment from a NATO summit that sent oil prices soaring and stocks tumbling. And third, what it all means going forward. The economic data, the Fed, and the bigger tug-of-war investors are now caught in between growth and inflation. So let's get into it, starting with that headline number. The Dow Jones Industrial Average had one of its strongest stretches of the year, climbing close to 2% over the week and smashing through the 53,000-point level for the very first time. It happened on Monday, as markets reopened after the July 4th holiday weekend, with the blue-chip index setting a fresh closing record. That milestone came just days after Alphabet, the parent company of Google, was added to the index, giving the Dow a heavier dose of big tech exposure than it's traditionally had. The rally wasn't just about one index either. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq Composite also posted sharp weekly gains, up 1.8 and 2.1% respectively, as investors came back from the holiday in a buying mood. Technology led the charge on that first trading day back, with strength in names like Oracle, Western Digital, and Teradyne. But the week wasn't a straight lineup. The Nasdaq in particular had a much bumpier ride than the Dow. Semiconductor stocks were the swing factor all week. Early on, chipmakers like Micron, KLA, and Teradyne sold off sharply as investors took profits after a blistering first half of the year. Remember, semiconductor names had surged more than 80% between January and June. That profit-taking dragged the Nasdaq down on more than one session, even as the Dow kept grinding to new highs. Market watchers described it as a rotation, money moving out of the hottest AI and chip trades and into steadier, more traditional sectors like industrials and financials. Then by midweek, chips came roaring back. Thursday brought a strong bounce, fueled largely by excitement around SK Hynix, the world's largest memory chip maker, which listed depository receipts on the Nasdaq to massive demand, reportedly more than 7 times oversubscribed. That enthusiasm spilled over into Micron and SanDisk, which both jumped sharply, helping the Nasdaq post one of its best days of the week even as broader sentiment stayed shaky. That covers point 1. Now let's move to point 2, the world news that shaped all of this, because geopolitics was really the story underneath the story this week. Tensions between the United States and Iran flared up again in a big way. Earlier in the week, the U.S. Treasury Department revoked the license that had allowed Iranian oil sales, and that came alongside a string of attacks on tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical oil shipping choke points in the world. The naval threat level there was raised to severe. Then came Wednesday, which was easily the most dramatic day of the week for markets. Speaking at the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey President Trump declared that the ceasefire with Iran was, in his words, over and threatened further military action. That single comment sent oil prices surging. Brent crude jumped more than 5% to above $78 a barrel and rattled equity markets. The Dow dropped nearly 577 points that day, its worst session of the week, while the S&P 500 also slipped. Interestingly, the Nasdaq actually held up and finished slightly positive, a sign that investors were still willing to buy the tech and chip dip even with a geopolitical storm brewing. By Thursday, markets found their footing again. Oil prices eased a bit, semiconductors rallied, and stocks broadly recovered even as US-Iran tensions remained elevated. European and Asian markets moved in sympathy through the week too. Japan's Nikkei and South Korea's Kospi both climbed on Thursday, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng slipped and mainland China's CSI 300 jumped over 2%. On the economic data front, the picture was mixed. The June jobs report came in soft, with the U.S. economy adding only 57,000 jobs against expectations of around 115,000, though the unemployment rate actually ticked down to 4.2%. That kind of soft but not terrible labor data fed into hopes that the Federal Reserve could eventually return to cutting interest rates later this year. Even as some strategists warned that with oil prices spiking again on Middle East tensions, inflation risks are far from off the table. A few other notable threads from the week. Elon Musk's SpaceX officially joined the Nasdaq 100 index, following its stock market debut in June, triggering a wave of buying from funds that track the index. Meta Platforms announced plans to launch its own AI chip and a new cloud computing business, sending its shares sharply higher. And gold, which had been a major safe haven story earlier this year, kept sliding, now down more than 20% from its January highs as investors continued rotating out of defensive positions. So that's point 2. For our third and final point, stepping back to the bigger picture, what's going on here? Wall Street closed out the week near record territory for the Dow, with the S&P 500 and Nasdaq not far behind, but the path there was anything but smooth. Investors are navigating a genuine tug-of-war, an economy that's still growing and a Fed that may cut rates, against a Middle East conflict that keeps flaring back up and threatening to push energy prices and inflation higher. As one strategist put it this week, the plan going forward is to focus on the signal over the noise. Given how much noise there was this week, that may be easier said than done. That's your recap for the week. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.